The consequences that accrue for failing to live up to the aspirations of this speech are fatal for the world. JFK made it clear that a nuclear war would be the end of all humanity and that peace is not just a nice to have, but it's an absolute. If we are to exist as a nation, as a people, as humanity together, we can only do so with peace. Yet when we take a look at the situation, the world that we live in today, we see no opportunity for peace. I'm struck when going back and looking at the time that existed when JFK delivered this speech, just how stark things were, because people today will say, well, it's never been this bad. Well, it has. People tend to forget that in addition to the Cold War being there, in addition to the specter of the Iron Curtain having descended across Eastern Europe, a reference to Winston Churchill's Fulton, Missouri speech. In 1956, the Soviet Union invaded Hungary to put down a popular democratic uprising that created a crisis throughout Europe. In 1960, Gary Powers was shot down. An American pilot shot down over the city of Sierlovs, modern-day Katernalburg. That was a very big deal. In 1961, 1 month after I was born, giving away my age here, the Berlin crisis, the crisis of the Berlin Wall that manifested with 33 Soviet tanks facing off against an equivalent number of American tanks, all loaded with live ammunition, ready to fire one another. Where do you see American tanks facing off against Russian tanks today? You don't. But we did back then. And then, of course, there was the Cuban Missile Crisis, which brought the United States and the Soviet Union on the verge of a nuclear conflict that had ensued would have been the death of hundreds of millions, perhaps billions of people. Things were tough back then. That's the environment. JFK had the courage to give this speech. This was not an easy speech. If you study the history of this speech and the way it was written, and I'm sure again you have, this was not an automatic. I mean, he only got away with this because he kept the State Department out of the writing process. My understanding is he had one of his advisors write this speech for him, or write this speech void of State Department interference. But this again will go down in history and should go down in history as one of the greatest speeches of all time, not because of how it resonated at the time it was given, how it resonates today. Is there a more pure vision of peace than that speech today? What American politician could give that speech today? What global politician could give that speech today? The answer is probably none. Definitely not any in the United States today. This is why it's imperative that the speech be sent out, transmitted to as many people as possible, so they understand what the pursuit of peace really means, how it's articulated, how it balances off against the national interest. What can we do? That's the big question. What can we do as people? I'm continuously frustrated by the fact that here in the United States today, we are stymied in terms of any effort to pursue policies, pursue personal diplomacy of a nature that would create the opportunity for the dialogue, understanding, and action. The Soviet Union that JFK spoke of, listen to his words. He didn't speak in praise of the government. He spoke in praise of the people, a great culture, a culture capable of doing great things, people who share the same values that we do. But today in America, we've blocked that out through what I call a disease, the disease of Russophobia. It's the fear of Russia, the fear of Russia. But what are we afraid of? And the fact is, most people can't articulate what they're afraid of. They can say the name of a Russian leader, Vladimir Putin, and from that, all evil accrues. They can speak of Russian policies, they can speak of Russian military. But very rarely do you hear people speak of the Russian people, Russian culture, Russian history, the Russian soul. These are all very important things and they are relevant. Kennedy touched upon them and touched upon their relevance and their importance to pursuit of peace, that we have a duty and responsibilities as Americans to make common cause with the Russian people because they believe the same things we do. They believe in peace. They believe in a better world for their children. They believe in mutual respect of nations. But right now, all venues are stopped. Back in the day of Kennedy in 1958, there was this Texan piano player, Van Clever, and he went to Moscow. He entered the first ever Tchaikovsky Music Festival and he won. He won. He won the hearts of the Russians, who were very cultured people, by the way, and he played their music, and he played it with an American flair. And he came in first. He came back and got a ticker-tape parade in the Avenue of Heroes in New York City, the only classical musician in the history of the Avenue of Heroes ever to receive that. What courage! I always tell people, you have to be your own Van Cleaver. You have to find a way to go forth. But Van Cleaver wasn't alone. Dizzy Gillespie went to the Soviet Union in 1962, and that was the time when, again, a lot of crisis, the Berlin crisis. But Dizzy Gillespie went. The Soviets called his music degenerative music. They said, jazz is the music of the degenerates. But the Soviet people, the Russians, the youth said, we want it, baby. We want to listen to that jazz. And they let Dizzy Gillespie go over, and he gave concert after concert after concert. Very successful cultural exchange. I think Leonard Bernstein, the composer, went there in 1959 and something amazing happened there. When he was doing his tour, he met with Boris Pasternak, a writer that had been somewhat shunned by the Soviets. He met with Sokovich, a composer. His final concert, he played Sokovich's Fifth Symphony to wild applause. Wild applause. What I'm trying to get at here is there was people-to-people exchange taking place during the time of JFK's speech at American University. And so when he uttered these words about the necessity to reach out, make common cause, not with the Soviet government, but the Russian people, the humans, human-to-human contact. We were doing that. We're not doing that today. Not at all. When I listen to Kennedy's speech, it resonates with me. I'm of an age where I can't say that I saw the speech. He delivered in June 1963, and I was a whopping just about to turn 2 years old at the time. But the consequences of the speech, what it led to disarmament, nuclear arms control, etc. In 1987, because of the speech that Kennedy gave at American University, Ronald Reagan, arch-conservative, who called the Soviet Union the evil empire, sat down with Mikhail Gorbachev, and they signed the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. Now, in Kennedy's speech, you heard him say that no treaty can give you absolute confidence, no text, no matter how tightly written. But the difference with the INF Treaty is there was a new component. It's called on-site inspection, the human element. I was part of that human element. I was one of the initial cadre of a unique category of people on-site inspectors who were dispatched to the Soviet Union. The Soviets dispatched theirs to America, and we began the process of putting humans on the ground to verify compliance with the treaty. It didn't matter how tightly the text was written. The eyeballs and the brain attached to a good inspector can give you some of the best confidence ever. We made arms control come alive. We made it possible. We talked about not limiting the numbers of nuclear weapons, but reducing them. The INF Treaty eliminated entire categories of nuclear weapons for the first time, and the success of the INF Treaty led to the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaties. 1, 2, didn't quite happen. 3, stillborn. But the point is, we were talking about disarmament. Today, there are no arms control treaties. Yes, we have New START there, but it's been suspended and there's no effort. It expires in February of 2026. No effort to breathe new life in it. John F. Kennedy's vision of pursuit of arms control is a necessary component of peace is